And we're off. What's up, everybody? How are you doing? My name is Luke Thomas. This is the 3rd of January, 2025. Can you believe it? We have arrived in 2025. This is episode 235 of my live chat. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Now, if you're new here, this is not the time we usually do it. We usually do it on Thursdays at 3 p.m. East Coast time, but I had some family affairs to attend to, so I couldn't do it. But here we are today, here on this Friday, the 1st of 2025. So thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. On the docket today, anything we want to discuss about the UFC in 2025, combat sports in 2025, big fights, you name it. Really, whatever's on your mind, we can get to. So thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Hit subscribe if you haven't. It's free. It doesn't cost you nothing. The way this works is we'll go for about an hour on the free questions, and then if you're a member or you want to put something in the super chat, you can get on the paid portion for free, or if you're a member, or yes, there's a free portion and there's a paid portion. If you're a member, it's free no matter what. Okay, that's what the point I was trying to make in a very ham-fisted and really poorly explained kind of way. Nevertheless, I'll do a better job with the questions, I hope, today. So thank you so much for joining me. Without further ado, let's get this party started, shall we? All right, we are back. Let's do it this way. Yeah, that's better. A couple of housekeeping notes that I promised from last week that I have to get to. There may be more, but I certainly can think of 2 big ones that I have to get to. Last week, here's a case where I am being hoisted by my own petard. Someone asked or noted that you can't say the word conjugate if you're only talking about verbs, but not if you're talking about adverbs or, adverb to a noun or noun to an adverb. But you can't do it for adverbs, only for verbs. That is true. So here I am lecturing the free world about conjugation. Lecturing the world about the nature of which word to use, the noun or the adverb version of it. But the interplay between them is not conjugation. That is strictly reserved for verb tenses. So I have to kind of take the L on that one. In fact, not kind of. I have to expressly take the L on that one. So I wanted to start off today observing that if I can. Apologies for that. I mean, I'm still right about the point between the noun and the adverb and how there's confusion around that, but the interplay between them is not conjugation. So that's the first thing. Second of all, there was a gentleman last week who was a 600 deadlift puller who noted that, hey, you can fix mixed grip, which is one underhanded, one overhanded, or you can do either way. That you can train out any kind of injury problems with good technique, and that might actually be true. But I actually looked this up after the show last week. There is an absolute mountain of evidence that mixed grip on balance leads to far more injury than double overhand. Because someone was asking about the nature of pulling with a trap bar, which has neutral grip. So it's not this way where it's the bar lined up with the bar, or this way lined up with the bar. The handles face parallel to your body, and so you have what's called a neutral grip. If you use a mixed grip, and I want to be clear, I've never had an injury from deadlifting using a mixed grip, and I do think that the gentleman was right that good technique can iron out a lot of these problems. However, please don't take my word for it. There is an enormous amount of studies that show mixed grip leads to all kinds of injuries, mostly distal bicep tendon tears. Because again, people might be doing it wrong, but even when they're doing it wrong, double overhand, they have less complication. And then if you're doing double overhand, you can do what's called a hook grip, which is a whole different thing. But okay. Last but not least, I mentioned some kettlebell accounts that I had read off on IG. There was one I want to give a particular shout out to. He doesn't coach me. I don't have any relationship with this guy in any kind of business sense or otherwise. He's just a dude that has come up on my feed. His name is Trevor, and I think his account on TikTok is called Trevor's Instinct, which sounds like a bad romance novel. Nevertheless, he's a kettlebell fanatic, and he does one-on-one coaching and then does a lot of different exercises and complexes that you can do throughout the course of your day. It's called Trevor's Instinct. He's pretty fucking jacked. Now, he's got a whole other side of things about, belief and whatever the fuck, and eating is a weird thing. He has a sort of a weird way of eating, or relative to common standards, an unusual way. So he's got a bit of a vision beyond just use of kettlebells that may or may not appeal to you, but his kettlebell training appears to be quite good. And, I don't do a lot of it at the present moment, but to the extent that I do, I've picked up a few things from him along the way. Okay? All right. So there we go. That is the beginning of the show. There may have been another one I want to get to, but those are the three big ones. I wanted to make sure I got to those today. All right. Let's refresh this. Again, it's a change time. I don't know who's going to be here today. I appreciate everyone who is. I'm expecting a smaller audience than normal. We'll make do with what we have. Thank you for being here just the same. All right. Let's get this one up, shall we? Yes. Ooh, you can't see that one, can you? Now you can. All right. Luke, you mentioned that when Mighty Mouse retired, you would tell us what the mousetrap submission was. That is true. That he showed you in studio. He did do that. Can you finally share that with us? You know what? I don't know. He did say at the time, until he's retired, he didn't want it out there, but he is retired. And then he said he wasn't coming back. I'll tell you what, if Mighty Mouse is cool with it, I really don't want to cross any boundaries with him if I don't have to. If he's cool with it, I'd be happy to show. I would just want to double check. But yes, when I was at SiriusXM, he came in studio one time and he showed it to me. And it's basically the thing I can say about it without really getting his approval just yet. But at the time, it's a pick your poison kind of problem. You can do one thing and you can find trouble, or you can react to what he's giving you and then go to another way and find trouble. But either way, you're going to find fucking trouble. That was the mousetrap. But I would want to make sure I don't want to get sideways with him, if I don't have to. But yeah, I would love to. I would love to tell you guys about it. It's cool. Super cool. Look, Aaron Pico is now a free agent. I did see that. I assumed the plan would be to fight for fight with the UFC. If this does happen, how do you think he does? Good question. I would imagine that there's no. I would be surprised if, now that it's true that he's a free agent, if he doesn't end up going to UFC. I think that is basically a foregone conclusion at this point. How does he do? That is a huge mystery, but I think he is been rebuilt about as best as you possibly could after a very rough start and a very inauspicious beginning, despite all of the hype that followed him. I think that they have done the very best job with him that they could at Bellator. I think that Brendan Gibson and his team have done the very best job that they could, with very good results in slowly. I mean, he's one of the few cases where if it had been like maybe one or two more fights along the path he'd been on, his career would be over by now. And they really dialed everything back. They gave him just the skills he needed to, with the game plans he needed to, against the right opponents that he needed to slowly kind of build back to something. And he has really become, I think, quite special in the end. I think he's competitive with any of the guys in the top five. But it is hard to say exactly where he falls in any of that. Could he be champion? I don't think he beats Ilya. I don't think that's really on the table, but I think he could beat potentially. I don't know. I don't know how he would do against the top five, but I think he would be competitive with them. And I believe that's probably the best use of his time, is top five, top seven UFC guys from here on. How old is Aaron Pico? I don't even know his age anymore, because he obviously was so young when he got started. How old is old Aaron Pico? 28. Yeah, I mean, he's just entering what should be his prime. So I think he is going to do something potentially really special if that rebuild went the way that we think it did. But there's really it's just baseless speculation to say how he would do and how he would do against. Let me think about who the tougher matchups would be. Movsar is going to be a tough matchup for anyone, no matter what. Lopez too, especially with Pico, who needs like a more carefully considered fight. A fight against Arnold Allen would be cool. That'd be a real cool fight. I like that one a lot. A fight against Yair would be kind of insane, but I like that one too. I don't know what they want to do with Brian Ortega. Hard to say about that. But those two aforementioned, the Arnold Allen and the Yair, I think those are great places to start. I mean, you could do other ones too, but those would be great places to start, I think, for him. Luke, if covering the sport of MMA was not your profession, how many events would you watch per year? That's a really tough one to answer. I don't know how to answer that. The reality is, before I got into it, I watched every single thing imaginable, and I've watched a lot since then. If I wasn't doing this, how much of my Saturdays would I give up to watch this? I don't know. I mean, partly there is just the issue of, as you get older and you have family time and you have commitments and you have a life, when you're in your 20s and you don't really owe anyone else any of your time, it's very easy to give all of your Saturdays to this. And then when you get into your 30s and late 30s and then early 40s, and now you have kids in the picture and God only knows what else involved, you just simply don't have the time to be like, oh, I'm just not going to hang out with my kid every Saturday night, right? It doesn't, or 3 Saturdays out of the month. Like, I mean, I guess you could do that. And to some extent I do it in the sense of my job where I get paid. So then I have flexibility on the other side of my schedule to like make up for some of that time. But like, if I didn't have that flexibility and I had like a 9 to 5 kind of a job, and then also on Saturdays, I'm just posted up watching fights and not interacting with my family or seeing friends, I don't know how that would work. It's just, the point I'm trying to make is you naturally get pulled in your life, depending on the way that it goes. But if you get married and have kids, it naturally pulls you in a way that makes that kind of time commitment very, very difficult. So I would imagine that I would watch a lot of it. I would imagine that I would watch maybe even most of it. But I think I just don't know, without, the occupation being a driving factor, I simply do not know how it's possible to watch all the things that I watch now, including now boxing and everything else in like the middle of the day. I can justify these things because A, it's a job, and then B, I can make up for it with a flexible schedule on the other end, right? There's so much more during the weekday that I can do because I have a degree of flexibility. But without that, and then you're just giving up your Saturdays, like, I don't know what kind of a dad I would be doing that. I just don't know how to answer that. If Islam successfully defends against Arman, what do you think is next for him in the lightweight division? A fight with Moicano, provided he beats Dariush. Where does he go from here? They could do that. I would imagine they could do that. I don't know how much interest Islam would have. I think Islam's got his sights set on 170, right? And of course, they're at the mercy there of what happens between Bilal and Shavkat. I don't know, like, really what is left for him to conquer at 155. I mean, you've got a couple of up-and-comers you could maybe wait for. They could maybe do the Topuria fight. I don't know. Again, I don't know how much Islam has an interest in fighting yet another featherweight in another super fight in that direction. I don't know. That's a tough one, where it's like they could give him the Moicano fight. That is certainly possible. Paddy Pimblett could be up there, but if you're Islam and you're 33 and you probably don't have, I would imagine that these guys in Khabib's camp are going to be encouraged to retire sooner rather than later. I would imagine that there's probably not many. He's going to be looking to fight the biggest names possible. This is not the same era of the 2010s where guys were just posted up and trying to rack up as many title defenses as possible over the longest amount of time. We're just kind of past that. And I think Khabib is going to be in his ear. They're going to be chirping. So I would say that a Moicano fight is possible, but less likely than something like Topuria if that were to emerge as a, let's say he beats Charles Oliveira. If Shavkat wins, I know his first fight against Islam might be weird and UFC might not want to do that. Maybe he goes up and fights a different top contender at 170. Something where there's a big name involved, or a reasonably big name involved. I think that seems much more in keeping with his interest given the time remaining. Because I think Javier Mendez told Submission Radio maybe last week or a week or two ago, that he doesn't have much time left. If that's your reality, where are we with this? Maybe Max Holloway for the BMF title, if that's a thing, something along those lines, more so than just fighting Moicano, who is a very good fighter. But I don't know like what that does for Islam's legacy versus a fight at 170 versus, I don't know how much the BMF belt would give to him, but it gives more than what Moicano would have to offer. It seems like that's the better direction that they're going to be headed in. Why does the UFC have a lower finish rate, 44.8% in 2024, compared to other MMA organizations like Cage Warriors with 65.9%? This is a very easy question to answer, actually. This is a very basic one. The reality is you get very good fighters in Cage Warriors. But what you also get in Cage Warriors, because of the nature of what they do, they're like a high level regional but international promotion where many guys and ladies who eventually make their way to the UFC come through Cage Warriors. So let's be very clear. Cage Warriors is a very quality promotion that has quality fighters, that sends quality fighters to the UFC and other places as well. Like, it's a very good organization. But the reality is they're also, because of what they do, and there's something of a regional organization where they're going to have more people from the UK, obviously, than many other places, not just UK, but that's going to be a predominant amount of what they do and who they service. You're going to get lesser talent on those shows. And as a consequence, it's going to be much easier for the top guys or whatever to polish them off. Like, if you go to the regional scene, I've made this point before, like, you'll go there and you'll have like 20, sometimes more than 20 fights on a card. And you're like, how the fuck is this possible? It's because like 3 of them might go to a decision. The vast majority just get wiped out one way or the other. 2 guys have a brawl. One person really sucks. I remember watching Sadiq Youssef at Cagezilla. I don't know if it was called Operation Octagon at the time, but Cagezilla coming through there and just fucking people up because he was destined for big things. And then they would put some other dude who was just in the neighborhood against him, because that's what, when you're at the amateur or, low-level pros, that's who you're fighting. And he fucked him up proper pretty quickly. Like, that's the kind of thing that happens. So you get a much higher finishing rate. Well, by the time you get to the UFC, you get a lot of guys who, yes, you can get your Yuri Prochazkas, and you get some other ones who, let's just say candidly, are not defense oriented, but the overall level of defensive ability, the overall level of defensive awareness is much, much, much higher. Guys are more durable by the time they get to the UFC. Guys have better defense, typically speaking, by the time they get to the UFC. And that combination between them, and also they have better offense, which makes it harder to get your offense going. And so as a consequence, you're just going to get a much more difficult person to put away. It's easier to do that the further you get away from the top of the pyramid, so to speak, of the talent pool. Please don't take my word for it. I always say this. There's many, 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 many reasons why you should attend a regional or even a local MMA promotion. Again, Cage Wars is high-level international MMA, so it's a little bit distinct from that. But as an example, as I just made, you go to like your local MMA show, watch how many finishes there are and watch how quickly they come. I mean, it's a lot of first-round finishes. This is why you'll see guys come off the regional scene into the UFC. It's a little less true now because the regional scene's been fleshed out a little bit more. But like, I remember when Chris McRae made his way to UFC, I think he had all first round finishes. That's just the reality of the regional scene. It's you're going to get guys who are good versus a lot of guys who have fatal flaws, and they're going to get feasted on, and that's the result. So it doesn't mean that they're. I mean, look, could you make an argument that there's better matchmaking in Cage Warriors and that plays a role? You could make that argument, I suppose. I just don't think that's the likeliest explanation. I think you just see much higher level of defense. And again, one more point of this. I've said it before. There's guys like Jonathan Goulet. Jonathan Goulet was a really good Canadian fighter, very skilled, did not necessarily have the greatest chin. And I think that really shortened and impacted his career because he would just get tagged and it would be a problem and he couldn't really recover from it. Most guys who have chins who are not really suited for high-level combat sports, they kind of get weeded out ahead of time. Dude, I can't tell you how many guys you might find in various gyms who have really good skills, but are just not very durable and don't have that or may not have great mental toughness and they just can't really ascend. And you might get guys who are, vastly more skilled than them too in the UFC, but you'll sometimes get guys who are less skilled but are durable as shit because it has carried them through. It's the things that make you ascend to the top are also the things that if you don't have them really undercut you early. And so you can get lopsided finishing results like that. Let's see. If MK lost its current financial support, i.e. DraftKings, could you guys do the show completely by yourselves? Yes. I've seen smaller channels seemingly support themselves financially with ad rev and then the join button, Patreon. And I just wonder if you guys have mapped out what technical skills you'd need, what essential team members you'd need on board, UBC, Long, Luke, blah, 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 and what minimum monthly, yearly dollar amounts you'd need if push came to shove and MK had to go independent. I think a lot of us would contribute financially to keep the show alive if its future ever truly hung in the balance. Well, boys, I can tell you it came pretty close. Although not, we're funded for the next year. So the answer is yes. This is something BC and I have discussed quite a bit. Now, we've not had the kind of discussion where we're like, it never got to the point where we were like, okay, let's map out a budget right now. What does it look like? What kind of show delivery we do have to do? What do we have to charge for memberships? Like, we didn't really come up with a hardcore business plan, but it definitely got to the point where we had to ask some of these questions ourselves. The answer is yes. But, you know, a few problems emerge along the way, because who would do social for us? You know, how much would we actually be able to charge and get away with? And when I say get away with, I mean, like, you know, return value to the customer at what price point we are charging. Some of these things are a little bit, we've not really sat down and understood. But the answer is, have BC and I had conversations along these lines? Yes. We don't anticipate needing it for the foreseeable future, but it is something that has been on our radar. Back burner, I think, is probably the best way to put that. But, you know, given the year that we had, having things on the back burner is probably pretty prudent at this point, right? So, yes. Let's see. Luke, on the MK mailbag, UNBC discussed how Jake might F up Conor. Jake Paul. Won't it just be an exhibition, though? At least the original idea with Logan was called an exhibition. I think it's still with Logan. There was a little bit of hemming and hawing about Jake. I don't think that's really likely. I think it seems to be with Logan. You can still get fucked up in an exhibition. The likelihood is lessened, but, you know, go look at what happened. Granted, it was Japan. It's a little bit different. Go look what happened to Tenshin Nasukawa when he fought Mayweather. Mayweather just marched him down and fucked him up. No problem. You can still do that in an exhibition. It would depend on the rules of the exhibition. It would depend on the relevant sanctioning body. It would depend on the bout agreement. It would depend on, I mean, any number of factors that they could introduce contractually because it's an exhibition about what they could do and couldn't do. Nevertheless, there are ways in which, I mean, Tyson Fury got dropped by, was that a pure exhibition or was that on a pro record? I forget. Let me double check that before I keep talking out of my ass. Let me see here. Let's see. No, I guess it went on the pro record. It went on the pro record. So no, that wouldn't count. Nevertheless, there are ways in which it can be done. It certainly lessens the likelihood of it, if that's what you mean. Because they can introduce things in the bout agreement that could make, you know, certain forms of offense limited. They could use big gloves. They could change round times. They can, you know, no knockdown rule, or if there's a knockdown rule, it's over, or some shit like that, you know. But we have to see. It's without knowing what's in the bout agreements, without knowing what they want out of this, if it actually ends up happening, it's really, really difficult to say. Luke, long time. Oh, here we go. Well, okay, I can skip that part. But Luke, long-time listener, thank you. What would be your best tips for visiting NYC for a week-long trip? That's an expensive trip. I already have a broad understanding of the city, being that it's my first time being there. Okay. Jesus, dude. What could you do in New York City? I mean, that is fucking endless. Oh, my God. I wouldn't even know where to start. MoMA would be a top destination. Spending time even in just Central Park would be a destination. Playing chess in Washington Square Park would be a destination. I have been to New York and lived in New York. I don't need to see Times Square, but I think if you've not, there's probably a little bit of a case to go see, not for the ball dropping, but for Times Square more generally. Seeing the Bull down by Battery Park, the Wall Street Bull down by Battery Park. Obviously, I think taking the water taxi to go see the Statue of Liberty is cool as shit. You can spend some time on Ellis Island. These are very touristy things, but I feel like if you've never been, they're actually kind of important to see. But honestly, if I could just tell you the truth of the matter, the reality is, if I were spending some time in New York and I had a week to do it, I would map out well in advance places I would want to eat, because I don't care, if it's not your number one food city in the world. It's New York is at worst top 5, and I would really say top 3 food city in the world, and arguably number 1. Like, there's just not many places like, and I know people love to shit on New York who don't know anything about it and don't live there and don't visit there and haven't seen it. New York is one of the world's great cities. I don't give a fuck what anybody tells you. I lived in New York for several years. I've been going back and forth to New York at least once or twice a week for almost 15 years at this point. Not quite that long, but pretty close. New York is the shit. I don't give a fuck what anybody tells you. It's got its problems like any city. Please don't misunderstand me. It's not some heaven on earth place. Like, it's got real problems, but it's got real charm too. The best of everything on one level or another is in New York, and that is especially true of its food scene. It's got limits too. I would say that LA has better, Mexican food for sure. But there's better food in Jersey if you're Italian. There's some truth to that as well, but in general, the food tour you can take in New York is almost unlike any place you can go anywhere else on earth, to say nothing of the history that's there, to say nothing of the things to see that are there. And I'm leaving out a gazillion things you could do beyond that. Like, there's just, dude, the city that never sleeps, bro. It's like I didn't even mention anything in Brooklyn. I didn't even mention so many of the cool things to see in Queens. Like, you could skip Staten Island. Staten Island kind of sucks, but Bronx too. Like, New York is an endless array of things in which to enjoy. But if I had a week, I'm telling you, the thing I would prioritize, to a degree, I'm being serious, is where I'm going to eat, because there's just a very, very, very unique opportunity there. Luke, if the UFC made a deal with the PFL to get Dakota, who do you think they should offer in return? Are y'all aware that there's rumors going around that they've tried this? I've heard... listen, when I say rumors, I mean just that. I'm not reporting to you anything. I don't know anything to report. But definitely during the winter holidays, there were some rumors that I heard. And again, I want to be clear. Listen to the words coming out of my mouth. Rumors that I heard. You would be well advised to take them as such and wait until they are verified in some way. But that she was in high demand by outside parties. It just didn't work. So, absent that, if they were actually able to make a trade, I would give up a lot, to be honest. I think that the level of what you can do with what she offers is special and unique. And it would be wise for them to give up somebody. I mean, dude, consider what they gave away last time. For Ben Askren, they gave away the greatest flyweight of all time. And I'm not here to cast aspersions on Ben Askren. I think the trade made sense for both parties. I think it made sense for the UFC to get Ben. He injected a lot of life at the time he was there. And it made sense for one to get Demetrius. And, listen, I don't think it made a lot of sense for UFC to give up on Demetrius. But if they weren't going to use him properly, if there was kind of big conflict between them, yeah, maybe it made sense to go somewhere else. The parties all kind of got a little something out of it in that way. I don't think it was the worst trade in that sense. Obviously Demetrius is going to go down as one of the greatest. In that sense, there's some asymmetry. But I'm just pointing out, look at what they were willing to give up. I think they would be willing to give up something significant to get Dakota, and I wouldn't blame them. I don't know what's going to happen next year, because I don't know what the PFL can do with her. I don't know what that's going to... it's really, really hard to say. But, dude, she is an electrifying talent, and what they could do with her in UFC is make her into a fucking star. I have very little doubt about that. Similar kind of question here. Will Ditcheva get an immediate title shot when she joins the UFC? She should. She absolutely should. No question about that in my mind. She absolutely should. She is, she would leapfrog all these other fighters. So what? She beat the fuck out of Tyler Santos. I'm not saying that by itself makes it, but all first round finishes last year, I believe, right? And for that tournament, and she, like against the most credentialed opponent, that was not first round. I think that was second round, but she fucking polished her off. Dude, she's awesome. Dakota Ditcheva is fucking awesome. And if you're the UFC, if you're going to give Kaya Sakura, who is not, a little bit more battle tested in certain ways, but I don't think has nearly the upside that Dakota has. If he can get one, granted, it's a relatively weak division in terms of available contenders, so he gets to jump the queue. Women's 125 is not quite like that, but Dakota is also much more interesting. Yeah, I if I was in the UFC, I would. Yeah. And I realize some of the other fighters might not like it, but what are they going to do? Go to PFL? I mean, I'm thinking like the UFC here. Like, what are they going to do? You know? Here's an interesting question. Luke, how long until Dana White finally abandons Power Slap? Or does he step down as UFC CEO to focus on Slap full time? Also, have you seen my funny timestamps on your reaction videos? Any comments? I've seen some of them, not a bunch. But in terms of the Dana White thing, I don't think he's going to abandon Power Slap anytime soon. He's pot committed. He has invested an enormous amount of his identity with the brand. He has battled with the media about how wrong they are with the brand. He had to deal with cancellation and the failure to launch on TBS and then going to Rumble. Like, he's got a score to settle. I think in his mind anyway, he's got a score to settle. Dude, if Dana White feels like he's got a score to settle, he's going to try and settle it in. Dude, he's going to be petty about that till the very bitter end. So, as long as they've got like the UFC / TKO machine to kind of prop up Power Slap, right? Because, you go on UFC.com and there's fucking ads for it. You go on the UFC's YouTube channel and they're filling it up with Power Slap videos. Like, they're just constantly pumping it into your face. As long as they've got that, and I don't see any reason why that would change in the short run, he is not going to abandon that brand. And I know what you might be thinking, which is like, well, why not? The brand sucks and everybody hates it. Dude, I guarantee you, and I don't think he's right, but I guarantee you that he believes it's just a matter of time before he convinces everyone of this. And I don't think it's going to play out that way. And so you might be asking, okay, well, when it finally dawns on him that it won't, what will he do? That is years down the road. Years. I don't think they're I don't think that they're trying hardcore to make money with Power Slap right now. Right now, they're just trying to present Power Slap as like a really important, cool thing that's like at the vanguard of combat sports, when in fact it's just the dumbest shit for the worst people. But they're still on that like fuck you mission. Boy, I gotta tell you, the amount of fire that I've seen Dana White be able to pursue causes with when it's backed by the fuck you fury is significant. It is quite a bit. So I'm with you. It's so fucking weird that they've got TKO has pro wrestling, which, I used to be really against. It's not for me, but I'm not against it. Like, if people like it, I don't have any negative thing to say about it anymore. It's not for me, but God bless you, enjoy it. And it's obviously a big business. So that's one. Two is they've got MMA on lock, right? 3, this year, they might go do Power Slap. Sorry, what am I saying? Boxing, which remains to be seen what that's going to be. And then 4, if they get in on Sport BJJ and they really try and lock that up, it's like, dude, you've got all these other things where you're doing efforts in cool ass sports. You can like boxing or not, you can like jiu-jitsu or not, but I'm sorry, those are cool combat sports, but I think a lot of people's measurements, or many anyway. Why are you doing Power Slap? Like, what the fuck is this? And especially if it's like, why would you do Power Slap? Like, ask yourself why they want to get into grappling. And there's probably going to be many reasons, but here's going to be 2 big ones. One, there's no union. It's not federally regulated, no nothing, right? It's very, very easy to get in when you've got all this combat sports muscle. You've got your own distribution channel, essentially, with Fight Pass and then everything else. You've got a facility in which to stage events, all kinds of stuff. Commentary crew. You're ready to go. and you have no union, you have no regulation. That's one. Second of all, you're dealing with a lot of guys who, as athletes, probably lack significant financial literacy. And more to the point, the prize money in jiu-jitsu is only now getting good. It has historically been nothing. And whatever the prize money is, okay, $1 million for Nicky Rod is a lot, but in general, they can easily pay, not a lot and secure the talent of many of the best figures in the sport. Like that's not very difficult to do. So it's like you're used to a bunch of guys who don't have, and ladies, who don't make a bunch of money. You can pay them more and you can get into it. So it's like very, very easy for them to just, relatively speaking, to march into this. And it's a legitimate combat sport. It's like, why would you spend any fucking time trying to prop up power slap when you can prop up sport jiu-jitsu? And there's just so much more value as an act in what you are doing relative to just having truckers and, gym teachers slap each other. It's like, what the fuck is this? But they're on the fuck you tour, and that's going to go for a little while longer before they're ready to abandon it. Believe me. What do you believe is a fair starting salary for a fighter entering the UFC regardless of experience? If you don't want to answer, I 100% get it based on previous discussions of Fighter Pay on your channel. I don't mind answering it, but people think it's a number you can pluck from the sky. It's not. It's not. Oh, it's 50,000. Oh, it's 100,000. Oh, it's $1 million. This is not the way to look at this. It's not a magic number that feels high enough. That's really the wrong way to imagine what it should be. Now, when you see 10 and 10, you obviously can realize that's not a lot of money when you got to pay taxes, and if you lose, and you got to pay your coaches and everything else. Like $10,000. Again, it's 10 and 10, but let's say you lost, you're going to lose, let's say, potentially 3,000 or so in taxes. Well, you're left with just almost nothing, right? You can't really make a living at all off that. You living in your car doing shit like that. So people think, oh, it must be 20. Oh, it must be 30. It must be 40. It must be 50. It must be 100. And that would be better. It would certainly, it's bigger. It would be a lot better. But it's really the wrong way to look at this question. The better way to look at it would be, what would that number be under two different considerations? One, if there was a union, let's start there. What would that number be? And the answer is we still don't know, but this is the point I would want to make. Namely, if there was a collective bargaining agreement, and this is somewhat disputed, but imagine they had some ability to negotiate through the collective bargaining for a series of things to make the lives of fighters better. So full-time, not just accidental health insurance and retirement benefits and a higher starting salary and bigger bumps per fight. The point I'm trying to make is they would pick a series of things to lift the fighter's condition such that they may only raise the entry price for a first-time fighter to be 20 and 20. Maybe they make it 30 and 30. But what they want is a bigger bump in pay between fights. What they want are more fights offered. What they want are better health insurance. What they want is retirement money. What they want is a piece of the money of the advertising. So, we get some of the ESPN broadcast money. We get some of the Trojan Condoms money. We get some of the DraftKings money. We get all of that. And so people think it's like, oh, it's got to be this number, otherwise it's not fair. And the reality is it's the balance of goods that would come from a more evenly negotiated world. So they could potentially not necessarily ask that much up front on what the fighters might want in terms of a significant bump if they got a bunch of money from the TV deal, if they got a bunch of money from sponsorships, if they got a bunch of money from you name it that was codified in the collective bargaining agreement. So I don't know how to answer that based on an exact number. It's the balance of goods overall in a different negotiated climate. That's the first thing I'd say. If the answer is there is none of that, but you had the Ali Act to at least protect the upper end, then, obviously the answer is going to be any number that's higher, but there's really no mechanism to force it up. I would argue that, the UFC could swing just about anything. I would say, It'd be a nice gesture, and I think would solve a lot of people's problems if they could start around 30 to 30, 40, 40, even higher than that, 50, 50, right? Where you could actually like what would be the, maybe they could do some kind of economic study and be like, what would it have to be for a fighter who competed 2, potentially 3 times a year and maybe lost 1 and won 1? How much would they have to make in order to not just be above the poverty line, but to be within middle income, blah, blah, blah. And you could find a way to make that. And maybe you could ask that. You could peg it to something like that. You'd have no mechanism to force it, but you could ask that, right? These are things you could do. But there isn't a magic number. It's like 50, it's 40, it's 100, it's a million. Like, these are just people want to see something that like feels good. Oh, that seems pretty high. We should do that. But that gets you into a lot of trouble, because then you see, I've seen people be like, oh, well, this fighter lost. Why is he complaining about pay? He made 130 grand for that fight. And it's like, he made 130 grand. Right. How much did the UFC make off of his labor in a year? And by that, I mean, not just what they brought, but, in individual instances in which they competed and they sold advertising against that, but in all the ways in which they make revenue off of their fighters, selling against television ads, the DraftKings money, the television rights deal, all of that. And the 130,000 is obviously not much. People ask, how come boxing promoters pay more and UFC doesn't? It's because UFC legally doesn't have to. There's no mechanism or competitive architecture in place through the laws that require them to do that, and so that they can just keep more. So you get into this point where people are like, well, I would love to make 130,000 for 30 minutes of work, but that's not really an accurate way of looking at what value they brought, what money they take home. It's finding a number and being like, that seems high, is just really the wrong way to do it. You could do some economic studies to find a baseline, potentially, but that would also run into some complications when you have international fighters and what those monies should be. The question you really have to ask yourself is, what's an environment where over the course of time fighters can maximize leverage for the biggest paydays possible? That's what you really want, and that there's no specific number tied to that. Yes. Happy New Year, Luke. Happy New Year, fellas and ladies. What do you think a post-Trump MMA landscape will look like in the United States? Post-Trump MMA landscape. Under the Trump administration, the UFC as a company is most likely going to receive favorable treatment. I mean, that's a foregone conclusion. But what do you think happens when or if they lose their powerful political connections? Could Ali Act like legislation be in MMA's future? This is here's the only thing I can say with confidence for the next 4 years. Like, does anybody think that no matter who is involved at the Department of Justice or who is running the federal, the FTC, there's not going to be any antitrust action taken on TKO? Like, we can all agree with that, right? Like, there's no fucking possible way that those two entities in government under Trump's eye, he's never going to allow any kind of antitrust regulation that could negatively harm UFC's business. I would be absolutely shocked at that. I don't see that happening at all whatsoever. And so the only thing you have to ask yourself is, whenever it is he relinquishes power, and let's say there is a change in political fortunes in the country, and so either the Democrats take over, or maybe you get some other conservative who is much more antitrust focused. I still tend to think there would be less of an issue to worry about in the latter versus the former. But let's just say that there is someone in office who no longer feels obligated to shield TKO from any potential either any kind of regulatory action related to their monopoly status. What would happen to them? It really depends on what happens to the machine of TKO between now and that point. In other words, do they end up having a huge foothold in boxing? Do they end up having an even bigger foothold in sport jiu-jitsu, or God only knows what areas they're going to move into, right? Do they really begin to just have this like all encompassing portfolio? And if so, or what are the negative effects? So like, one thing you have to understand is I don't know enough about the pro wrestling business to comment about its health. I simply do not know enough to say anything. On the MMA side, it is my personal belief that we are in the wealth extraction phase of monopoly here. where they've done basically everything they can with the product. There's really not much more ways to grow. I mean, there are some ways you could help prime the pump in China, which they're trying to do to an extent in Mexico. There's other places where you can build up fighter reservoirs, but in terms of the heights that they can reach, it's not like they're 100% maxed out, but there's not much more room to grow. And what happens in monopolies that we know in history is when this happens, they tend to less worry about innovating the product or even growing it meaningfully, since there's not really much growth imaginable. And then they turn their perspective into how much dollar value can we extract from this year after year. And that involves both what they charge at the ticket box office, that involves what they charge Saudi Arabia to take events there, what they charge ultimately to Netflix or ESPN or whoever ends up being their broadcast partner. They do all this and all the various rights fees that they get across the world. They're just trying to maximize what they can get from that, because there's really no competitive pressure. There's no real way to grow the product. I feel like we have entered into this in nascent ways, and that's going to continue at this point, which is why I think a lot of Dana White's interest is in places like Power Slap and maybe boxing and maybe even sport jiu-jitsu as well, which we'll see how this goes in 2025. But they're in the wealth extraction phase. Over time, the wealth extraction phase tends to ossify the product. It takes longer for some, takes shorter for some, but they kind of hollow it out over time because there's just not much reinvestment put back in it, because the market position has been so secure. The fan base really has no alternative. And even if there is some drop off, you're still, caked up with clout, in the words of, I think that's Paul Wall. Or maybe it was Chameleonaire. The point I'm trying to make is that's where we are. People are like, why are UFC ticket prices so high? Well, ticket prices are pretty high across the board. Like, I wanted to go to a Caps game. Jesus, fuck. Dude, a Caps game, because, Ovechkin's on fire. He's back. A Caps game at the Capital One Arena. God bless him, dude. I love the Caps. Shouts to Monumental Sports. Like, I got nothing bad to say about it, but it's like, my wife and I don't do poorly. We're, firmly middle class. And a night for three of us to go to the game, I wouldn't pay for parking because we can take the metro, but that would be like $700, maybe $800, and that's not even for like the best seats at all. Not even close. That might even be lower bowl. That might be second row. Ticket prices are high, but they're certainly no different for UFC. They're just like that. They're in the wealth extraction phase. So if somebody else comes around later that is very inclined towards monopoly breakup or antitrust or the like, and what I think will continue, at least on the MMA side, they certainly heighten their own risk. But you're asking about a series of events that have to take place that we are, in some ways, not even started, and in other ways, not even begun, or barely begun, I should say. We're just at the very beginning of this in a lot of different forms. I mean, Trump hasn't even taken office yet, right? I mean, so yeah, there's going to be zero antitrust against TKO at any point in the near future, in the medium term. And dude, the political opposition to Trump, I think, fair to say, doesn't seem to learn a lot of their lessons very well. I think most of us could agree with that. They're not great at absorbing what the electoral losses tell them and where the country's mood is and what needs to happen for them to regain power in a meaningfully and sustained way. But again, we are just at the beginning of these things. We simply have to see how it all turns out. Luke, how do you feel Jones would mentally respond to taking a hypothetical loss to Aspinall? Do you see him taking it in stride or struggling with it due to never truly experiencing it before? I think if he lost, and especially if it was like, well, let me think about that. I think no matter what, if he lost, he would want to run it back. I'd be very surprised if he lost and he just decided, that's it. Now, the caveat to that would be if he truly knows internally that he's done and he doesn't even care that he lost, that would not bring him back. But if you've trained to be MMA's Mayweather your whole life and you've gone from the pretty boy Floyd era to your money era, which is what it seems like Jon is in. He's past the Bones era, and he's in the the Money Mayweather era that he's in. I think a loss would be incredibly bad for what he has been trying to put together, but at the same time, I think that will inform what fights he takes. I think he would want it back. I just don't think he would want to end his career on a loss, while recognizing that he might also, like, part of the reason, like, why was he so adamant about fighting Stipe and like telling the world like Stipe is great? I mean, I think he knows his best is behind him. I think internally he knows that. I think internally he knows he's lost a step or two. I think he's still quite good. Don't misunderstand me. I think he's, a heavyweight leaving his feet for a spinning back kick to the ribs is impressive no matter what. But I think he internally understands he's not the same that he once was. And, Aspinall is a very, very, very unique challenge relative to what he's been facing. I'd be very surprised if he was just like, yeah, I got my ass kicked. I don't want to run that one back, especially if there'd be huge money in a rematch, which is still a very important motivating factor for him. In fact, he never seems to shut the fuck up about it, Luke, what was the first UFC/fight you saw, and how did it impact your fandom for the sport? For me, it was Jones versus DC1, and my introduction to the sport was a fight between Cerrone versus Miles Jury. At the end of round 3, when Cerrone was blasting kicks on Jury, who was grounded, I couldn't believe what I was seeing and instantly gravitated to the sport. Yeah, mine goes way back, summer of 1994, I believe. Maybe it was 5. I'm not exact. My timing on this could be off, but I remember that I can say this. I forget which summer it was and how much time had elapsed, but I can say definitively the first UFC event I saw was UFC 4. That was the first one. And then it was because of that I went back and I watched, 1, 2, and 3, and, was like, holy shit, what am I looking at? Because I think by 4, if memory serves, I think that was the one where he had to pull Chemo's hair to survive. Right? From guard. Let's see. No, the UFC 3. No, he submitted him. Yes, it was UFC 3. And UFC 3. I apologize. It was not UFC 4. UFC 4, he defeated Ron Van Cleef, Keith Hackney, and Dan Severn. No, that's not the first one that I saw. The first one I saw was UFC 3. Yes. Eventually, I saw Chemo basically beat him up for the majority of that round. And the only reason he was able to survive was he was able to grab Chemo's ponytail and eventually finish him off, but he couldn't continue in the tournament. So that's the only, he doesn't have a loss because he didn't fight anymore, but he couldn't continue in the tournament. And I forget who won UFC 3 in the end. It was Steve Jenham. Steve Jenham won that one. So that was the first one that I saw. And then it was off to the races after that. And you could imagine, like, at the time, that was Joe Rogan has a quote. I forget from which fight it was. I want to say around the UFC 40s, something like that. And he made a point. He goes, martial arts have evolved more in the last 20 years than in the last 2000. And obviously that's not quite true, but it is a great way to kind of illustrate how much, like, it's hard to overstate. Before UFC was around, and you guys know the story. Oh, there was a kickboxing guy, there was a jiu-jitsu guy, there was ninjutsu, there was aikido. There were all these like flourishing martial arts. MMA kind of ruined that in a way, in almost a good way, but certainly in a way, because you realized a lot of these things that we thought were valuable can't work at all. Or now that we've come back later, if you've got these other foundational skills, some of that can be brought back. But all you need is Taekwondo to defend yourself. That notion is completely gone. And to watch Royce, and then eventually when I rented the other ones after that, it was still all Royce, but all the body of work that he had turned in up to that point, it's impossible to overstate, like a skinny Brazilian guy beating the fuck out of some of these dudes. And you're like, how is this possible? It shattered everything that we knew about martial arts. And again, that quote is not like quite accurate, but it gives you an inclination of like what people were feeling and how much it changed hand-to-hand sport fighting at a bare minimum. Luke, longtime listener, I wanted to ask, is there a sense of gratification for you as an analyst when you see fighters living up to the hype? So Izzy, Khabib, or Ilya, perhaps. Given the fact that MMA is such a difficult sport, and also how does that make your job exciting? You talked about an MMA fan's lifespan of 5 years. Have you yourself ever reached a point where covering the sport is not fun and just a way to make a living? Well, there's definitely times where it's not fun covering it. I mean, I don't know what anybody who tells you that your job is just going to be awesome 100% of the time, I think is just fucking lying to you. You know, yes, I have a very nice job. I am very keenly aware of that fact. I am grateful for that fact, but it doesn't make it true that like there's never a downside to it. There can be. Gratification would not be the right word to describe what I feel when a product pans out. It's more just joy. It's more just joy. I've said this before, man. There's two basic times that you can look at for an elite fighter that are really, truly exciting. And I would argue one is a little bit more exciting than the other. To me, when a fighter is on the rise through the contendership queue, but not just any rise, like when they're bulldozing, like when Conor was coming up, when Khabib was coming up, when Jon Jones was coming up, when Ilya was moving through quickly, you know, they're just slashing through challenges one after the other. And there was a little bit of a hiccup with Ilya getting kicked in the head against Jai Herbert, but you know, he polished him off too. But that is such a fucking exciting time because you're wondering about the possibilities of what could be, and then they're answering it every time in the most dramatic of fashion. Like, I'm not talking about people who are eking their way up. I'm talking about like the big ones that are just marching through these people. It just it takes your breath away. The second part of their career that's going to be the best is like their title reigns. Those are usually shorter and, you know, difficult. That's a much harder place to show who you are as a fighter in certain ways because you're just going up against insanely other difficult guys who also are on the same kind of journey that they're on. Whereas with contenders, there's like an asymmetry in talent between them. I think that time when a fighter is coming up is like so fucking exciting. Can they do it? Can they really beat that guy? And then they smoke them. Well, they can't beat the next one. I mean, that's just a different kettle of fish. Smokes them. You know what I mean? Like that kind of a thing is so fun and so unique and so interesting. So it's not like gratification per se. I'm not like, you know, I didn't do anything, but it's some of the most joy that I feel as a fan in watching those moments unfold when they are making you reimagine what is possible with violent, quick authority, basically. Again, for the ones we're talking about here, like the rare special breed. And each time it's like this new universe of understanding of what they can do and who they can be. That to me is thrilling beyond words. Oh, Jesus, this is long. All right. Luke, if I'm being honest, I'm very surprised that you aren't as excited at the thought of a potential Shavkat versus Islam fight. I realize both have at least one, if not two fights before that becomes a realistic matchup. But to me, I feel the same about it as you did about Max versus Ilya. If I may, would you mind explaining why it's not that high on your radar? Because to me, seeing Islam have to go against a naturally bigger finisher who also has a keen understanding of grappling and striking is must see, especially since Islam appears to have a significant size advantage over most of the division, which doesn't get talked about that much because I think it's overstated. I don't think it's actually that true. I'm curious to see what his skills look like when the physical advantages aren't as prevalent versus an opponent. As a listener to yours in Sirius XM, I'm generally surprised that you aren't as extremely excited, intrigued by that particular matchup, especially since Dana has stated that if Islam beats Arman, he would definitely be open to allowing Islam to move up to 170. The problem is just the timing, because I would rather wait and to see Rachmanov defend, assuming he wins, because if Muhammad wins, then forget it. They're not going to fight. I would rather see Rachmanov defend one or two times before Islam moves up. Now, I realize the calendar doesn't account for that, or it doesn't work very neatly, so we're just going to get what we're going to get. But that's my issue. My issue is less so that it's not an interesting fight, and more it's just like we're going to have Rachmanov's first fight as a title defense if he beats Bilal Muhammad. against Islam, I don't hate it. It's just the timing doesn't work great for me. I prefer when champions who've done a little bit in their division then meet, right? Rather than I just won right over to a new division or facing somebody who's been outside of this division anyway. It doesn't work for, I mean, again, you're right. It's a phenomenal matchup for the reasons you stated on top of it. I take nothing from that. I just wish we could have a little bit more, if Rakhmonov is to be the winner against Muhammad, just a little bit more life. He can breathe at welterweight before we just pull that card, but God only knows what we're going to get at this point, right? Let me see if I can do one more of these. Oh, Jesus Christ. Let me see if I can go back to this one. Okay. Can we see this? Oh, no, wait, hold on. Happy New Year, Luke. Chael recently commented that in his era, Jamahal Hill wouldn't have been a ranked light heavyweight. I personally don't believe that Hill would have ever been champ if he had fought anyone other than older Glover coming off the Yuri War. Is Chael right that if we take the years, say 2008 to 2014, that Hill wouldn't have been ranked? And do you think Yuri beats Jamahal? So I don't think that's quite right, but I think he's on to something. I think it's not fair to Jamahal Hill to say he wouldn't have been ranked. I think he would have been ranked. There's a debate about where that would have been and what that would have looked like, but Jamahal Hill gets a lot of hate for reasons that are not often related to his abilities. He gets hate for his tattoos, which, are not great. But more than that, going after fans on social media, which I've said I don't think services his interests at all. In fact, I think it really negatively impacts them. I don't blame him for trying to, stir up shit with Poatan. That's what people in the fight game do. I don't really hold that against him. I mean, it didn't work for him, but that's not a cause. That's not a reason for derision or something, right? And I think his takedown defense is underrated, and I think his striking abilities are largely well regarded. I think he would have been ranked. But I also believe that there is no fucking way I've made a whole video about this. If you look at the division 10 years ago, when you had Rumble and you had Bader and you had DC and you had Jon Jones and Glover to an extent as well, and Phil Davis, prime Phil Davis, and then Rashad Evans and Dan Henderson, dude, like you're just talking about a much different caliber of athlete, generally speaking, irrespective of Jamahal, just relative to the whole crop of what we have now. You've got guys who have, I would argue, much better skill for like championship winning, which is, wrestling base. And the combination of the two of them, elite athlete, elite wrestler, or at least for MMA purposes, I think these guys would have their fucking way with the current 205 division. With some exception, Ankalaev would still be pretty good. You could pick a couple other ones if you really wanted to, but in general, like Poatan would not be a champion in 2014. Not even fucking close. Phil Davis would dump him on his fucking head. And if you don't want to say Phil Davis wouldn't, DC definitely would. And if you don't want to say DC wouldn't, Jon Jones 1 billion% would have done it. Like, there's absolutely no way Poatan is Poatan if he had to fight in 2014. Not going to happen. And I love Poatan. I think he's very good. And obviously he's very good for the fans and he's very good for the promotion. And everybody loves him and he had a fucking awesome year. Dude, Poatan's the man. It's not like he's not a great fighter. He's not a championship fighter in 2014. Tell me who he's going to beat at that time up the contendership queue, given the skills that he has against those guys, and win. If you think that, and even Anthony Rumble Johnson, dude, Rumble's not going to fuck. Dude, Rumble didn't even want to stand with Dan Hardy. Rumble's going to take him down. And if Rumble doesn't take him down, DC's going to take him down. If DC doesn't take him down, Phil Davis is going to take him down. If Phil Davis doesn't take him down, bet your ass Jon Jones is going to take him down and punish him. He's not a champion in 2014. Not even close. So I think it's a little overstated to say Hill wouldn't be ranked. That seems to me a little far-fetched. But that crop versus this crop is a substantial downgrade in overall ability. I don't make the rules, folks. That's just what it is. All right. With that in mind, if you've got anything for the super chat, you can fire those in now. If you're a member, you can do it for free. All right? Very good. Let's see what we got. From Jackson. Did I see the study that Gen Z thinks you need 600K annually to be successful, yet over 70% think they will attain that? 7% might attain that. Even then, probably not that much. Can't wait for the huge reality blow they have coming. Social media has doomed them. I'm not so down on Gen Z. They've been handed like a shitty situation where, we saw that one. We saw that. I talked to you guys about, first of all, just the economic and material conditions where like buying a home is very, very difficult. I think white collar jobs are not nearly as plentiful as the market might indicate, which I think there's been a latent amount of discontent about. But more to that point, we also talked about some of the ways in which like the online world has affected the real world, where I think it was like 40% of guys 18 to 25 haven't ever approached a woman to talk to her, which is like insane to me to even comprehend. I cannot do. By the time I was 25, I probably approached 100 women. You know what I mean? Like, just to talk. I mean, again, not even necessarily in some kind of I want to date you context. Just like, hey, I can make conversation with this person, the stranger, whether there's a romantic interest or otherwise. It's absolutely insane to me. So it's not like they've had a great run of things. And I didn't see this survey. I cannot speak to its authenticity, but I can just tell you that, like, very few of us watching, and I've never made 600K in a year. There's been a couple of years where I did really well, but there's not a year where I've ever gotten 600K. I can say that very firmly. No, you're not going to make 600K, but I don't take joy. Not that I'm suggesting you are, but I don't take joy in their economic predicament. Like, it's bad for society when an entire generation is locked out of either modes of social mobility or wealth generation, or the combination of the two. Same guy says, Luke, what was your first real job as a teenager? Any gig you particularly hated? Any favorite, least favorite class during college? First real job as a teen. I mean, I did odd jobs all the time. I mowed lawns. I did like landscaping stuff. So I did odd jobs. The first like real job in that corporate sense was I worked at Chick-fil-A. I worked to make chicken sandwiches, and I would work the register. And that was a good job. They paid well. They took care of us. You got time off. I think part-time I didn't get health insurance, but I didn't need it. I was, my mom's or whatever as a teenager. Chick-fil-A was a good one. I shouts to Chick-fil-A. They took good care of me. I never had a hated one. And least favorite class during college. Least favorite class. There was a few that I did not like. If we're not going to count the classes that I needed just to get a minor or a major, right? Like, your basics. You know what? No, let me say this. Let me take this off for just a second. Let me say this. I graduated with a degree in political science and a degree in philosophy, right? We've been over this a million times. And you had to pick which one was your dominant one before graduation day, because then that was the ceremony you would attend. And the ceremony would either be in the building or outside of the building. That was your dominant major. And in my heart, my dominant major was philosophy. But for my graduation purposes, I picked political science. And the reason for that is at William & Mary, the political science, they call it government, but the political science majors, they got to have their graduation ceremony. There's one main one, but then for your major, outside of the Wren building. The Wren building is the one that was built in the 17th century. It's been rebuilt a few times. Remember, the first college founded in the United States was Harvard. Number 2 was William & Mary. Phi Beta Kappa was founded at William & Mary. And that facility, the Wren building, W-R-E-N, was built in the 17th century. And you got to have your ceremony at the outside on the lawn of the Wren building, which is just much better for pictures. So to do my family a solid, I just did that one. But in my heart, it was philosophy. I bring this all up to say I almost regret that. The philosophy building was just a very corporate looking, not corporate, but just a very standard looking building on the Sunken Gardens where I went to school. But so much of what I learned in political science, there was some stuff that has endured as truthful to this day. But a lot of it was science that was based off of the best understanding of the information at the time, which has not proved durable over the course of my life. 20 years later, a lot of what they taught, some of it, what they taught has absolutely held. So much of what they taught has not. That is the exact opposite of my experience in philosophy. Now, granted, they're dealing with things that are less new in many cases. You're dealing with more time-honored studies of information and information systems or ethics and ideals and epistemology and the various like. These are not new considerations, but those have the lessons, the information, what I've taken from that has proved infinitely more durable than what I learned in political science. And I know that might sound like obvious to you. Oh, these universities are teaching bullshit. I'm telling you, at the time, it was a reflection of the prevailing senses of wisdom that we had. And it fell apart in the modern world. It fell apart after 9/11. It fell apart in the aughts. It fell apart in the 2010s. And it has continued to fall apart. And I've had to relearn different lessons that were absolutely not taught at that time. So they were not bad classes. They were classes that mirrored reality as we understood it at the time that has proven so not durable. I see so many people make fun of getting a philosophy degree or some other similar kind of humanities degree, especially now with this current debate over H1B visas and STEM education and everything. And I can tell you with absolute fucking certainty, as a 45-year-old guy, the best decision I made in college, bar none, was to get a philosophy degree. Best decision I ever made. I cannot, of all the dumbass things I've done in my life, and in particular that 4 years of college, whether it was which class to take, which girl to date, which fraternity to join, which money to spend, how to study, all the various, any choice you could have made, that was the best one I have ever made. And I don't regret studying political science. I just didn't know 20 years later I'd have to rethink everything. And I don't have to rethink everything in philosophy. I mean, there's always new things to consider, but you want to talk about enduring truths. Man, don't let anybody tell you that there is no value to that. It's value that they can't see. But I have lived it. I have lived it. Luke, have you noticed how often and frequently you mention porn stars and porn jokes, both here and MK? Yeah, they're fucking funny. Like almost every episode. Stay halal, brother. Lighten up, Francis. Lighten up. Pronounced Chinmai. Greetings from India, Luke. Have you had a good holiday season? Yeah, except for the sickness. Yeah. Thought I'd point out that Makhachev is facing his first non-former featherweight in a title fight. While Charles and Dustin are decent-sized lightweights now, they weren't featherweights as kids. They were ranked UFC featherweights. That's a great point. And then he got obviously the fights against Volk too. I'm sweating like a horn tree. It's so fucking hot in here. That's a great point. That's a really, really funny point. Good call. That's interesting. Granted, Charles and, as you indicated, Charles and Dustin now are pretty big lightweights. But yeah, that's a good point. An interesting discussion point. And thank you for the donation. George says, Kettlebell Gang. Yeah, man. I do love them. This dog says, Luke, 2024 was my first full year watching you. Helped me with a lot of dark times. Here is to a great 2025. I wish nothing but the best to you, your family, and your career. Well, thank you, gentlemen. 2024, I'm not going to belabor the point. Not my best year. But there were many positives. And what I can say is, stay tuned. Stay tuned. I think that I finally understood what happened to me last year and where things are headed. And I finally have a roadmap that I didn't quite. I had kind of like the inklings of a roadmap, but now I've got a real one. And I had a meeting about it this morning. So onward. This gentleman says, does Dana risk losing fan trust by overhyping events instead of balancing honesty with promotion? Not really. Isn't it crucial to build trust while still being a great promoter? I mean, you can't lose all trust as a promoter. That is true. You cannot be seen as completely slimy and whatnot, but overhyping is part of the job. I realize your question is he overhyping too much rather than, not at all. But I would say it's a fine line. And he has done a pretty good job for the most part over the course of my time covering him, of not getting so far that the fans abandon him or something like that. I don't think there's a lot of evidence for that. Dan says, what do you think of the whole H1B visa debate? Are foreign MMA sports athletes? No, these are for high-skilled potential employees. I was having a conversation with this. Jesus, fuck. Oh, it's Barbas. Barbas is doing okay. He was doing bad for a couple days recently, and then he's doing better. I would say he's... I was talking to Othello about this. The answer is kind of somewhere in the middle. There is simply no denying, and the math is very clear on this, there is simply no denying that a lot of these IT, sometimes beyond IT companies, Google does some IT, but beyond that, there is clear abuse of the program. There is absolutely unequivocal, clear abuse of the program, where what they're trying to do is lock in people who, with the threat of deportation, would be sent elsewhere. They are highly skilled. I mean, don't get me wrong. Many of these people are very highly skilled. About that part, there's really not that much question. But they're getting paid less, and this threat of deportation really makes their employment situation quite precarious. And so that makes them ripe for abuse. It lowers costs for the company. It's a problem. Like I don't know how you can look at, even an honest broker can look at the current state of the H1B visa program and then say that there aren't ways in which dominant tech firms haven't abused it, and not just the program itself, but then created very, very precarious situations for some of these people that they bring over who, they don't want to get fucking deported, so they just deal with whatever. Some measure of reform is certainly needed. I just don't know how that is even arguable. The thing I would caution against, and it's not like I'm taking Musk or Vivek's side, who had a whole different range of defenses for it, is basically a couple of things. One is that these were not brought over on H1B visas in that particular sense, but there are a number of critical junctures in history where high-skilled immigrants, particularly in STEM-related careers or fields, were the saviors of the United States. Again, it's not an H-1B visa thing, but you could just sort of think back to the atomic bomb. The recruitment of literally overseas scientists, physicists, mathematicians, and the like was crucial to winning the atomic wars, such as that we had them. This is not something you could have done strictly with homegrown talent. It would not have worked. We would have lost. It was that recruitment that happened. So it's not, there's HB2 visas. There's other different kinds of visas that can be used where we can arrange for what talent goes where under what conditions. I would caution people, I think is what I would say, is people like, oh, we should just, I don't know if people are calling for getting rid of H1B, but for massively scaling it back. You have to imagine, in a lot of the countries that these people come from, let's take India, for example, only the very, 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 very top get access to, the rewards that come from a top university education. And so you have these people that their education was paid for by their state in terms of up to post-secondary. And then obviously their university career was paid for by someone, and they had to take their talent somewhere. They're ready to pay taxes on day one. If you just look at their criminal profile, they are very low committing in that regard. Many of them have, nuclear families or the like. They're ready to contribute to the American economy day one. And this notion that listen to what I'm saying. All of them can be supplemented by willing Americans who have the exact same credentials at all times is, I think, a little bit overstated. Now, of course, it is also true that because the H1B visa program is abused, that there are many qualified Americans who could take those jobs, but of course it would cost the employer more. This is what I mean about reform. It is widely needed. I would just caution against too much fervor in cracking down on it and then sending those highly skilled people who have really nowhere to go at their home country, who are extremely bright, extremely talented, ready to commit to the American economy, bring the kind of thing exactly that you want, again, in the appropriate numbers. Losing sight of that, I think, would be a major problem. So let's find a world where we can accept those kinds of folks in the appropriate numbers, but not have it such that the robber barons of our era, or these IT fucking farms that just they sponsor tens of thousands of these applications with no intention of paying them what they're worth and then locking them into these deportation concerns, while other Americans in certain cases could absolutely be filling that. We need to get to a healthier place with that. Let's just make sure that the United States is, if you care about this sort of thing, staying competitive. And to do that, you need all the best homegrown talent. And it's like a college football program. You do have to do some recruiting. What does that recruiting look like? That's where the debate really happens. Paulie D, any big hopes for the year? What did you make of all the crashes with airplanes? Dude, there was like 4 in a week. I don't really know what to make of it, except airline travel is still statistically the safest form of travel that there is. And yeah, I got some big hopes for the year. I kind of alluded to it in a minute. I don't have more to say, but I would just say stay tuned. Stay tuned. Luke, got to ask, man, why do you feel Japan doesn't protect its boxing prospect as much as other countries? I've been watching some of my top-ranked backlog, and I'm seeing some of them get laid out. That's a better question for BC. I don't have a good one. I don't know enough about Japanese developmental systems in boxing to have any kind of say. Matt says, Luke, you've asked for recommendations on video games a few times lately. Fighters seem obvious, but is there any genre or type you're curious about? Thanks for content as always. My demands are simple. I need something that's not too much of a difficulty to pick up and learn, that I can spend 20 minutes doing and then leave and then come back, another 20, leave and come back, and maybe more or less than that, but and isn't going to take forever to get through. I don't have grand demands. I just have a kind of a small demand. I don't need I'm not trying to read, it's like reading books. I'm not trying to read, Dostoevsky. I'm just trying to read a little bit to get through each day. That's it. So someone recommended one of the Super Smash Brothers games, which has been fun. There's been a couple other ones that they've looked into. I haven't had a chance to get to yet, but I have very simple demands. I'm just a very average, less than average gamer with less than average time, but I still want to game a little bit, Lapo, welcome to the party, friend. Johan says, Luke, Johan from Netherlands, I believe. Been a donk since the first time you joined the beat. I lasted longer than most, but the fighter pay, Conor, and how the UFC handled it, and CTE now gets me. Thanks for all. Guys, I've told you guys about this kind of a thing. I get letters and emails and DMs like this all the fucking time. I know people feel like I've beaten a dead horse with it, and I am sorry about that, but this is the kind of thing I get all the time. What does it mean? I don't know, except that I feel like they've absolutely homogenized their own fan base. But this kind of thing has played out over and over and over and over and over again. It's more the norm than not at this point, for me, for a certain kind of fan. And I understand it. I completely understand it. Jalen says, what would you rank all the fights between Charles, Justin, and Chandler? Kind of the four kings to a degree of MMA for a period of time. Wouldn't you agree? Personal fave is Charles versus Justin. So let me think about that. So I'm going to say Charles Chandler, the first Justin, Charles Justin Chandler, and then the second Justin. I think I got him right. This gentleman says, when you commentated LFA a while back, what did you think of James Romero's Darce choke on the high-level wrestler? Asking because he hits that in our gym all the time. Dude, he was nasty with it. It was so quick. It was so fast. And my favorite part about it was just the fucking authority of the gator roll. He didn't hit it. I think he adjusted his position, if memory serves, and then re-rolled and then got it, just with a nasty little clamp. Dude, he looked awesome. He looked awesome because the guy he went against, I think, wrestled at Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, I think, which is still a good wrestling program. And he just ran right through him. He ran right the fuck through him. Dude, that kid looked amazing. Can't wait to see more from him. Carrie says, will Khabib, Islam, Umar, and Usman be the Mount Rushmore of one camp of fighters? The combined 68-1 from a group of people who grew up together and conquered MMA is mind-blowing. Yeah, I mean, you could do a looser one for like ATT, a looser one for AKA, but that's not exactly what you're talking about. Like what you're talking about here is like, again, like almost like a more of a family-ish kind of unit. And I don't know what would top that. Even the Gracies can't match like the modern prowess of this. Jonah says, should a reporter break the news if they find out the new TV deal? Should they? Sure. What are the main arguments for or against doing so? There aren't, assuming your information is accurate and it's in the public's interest, which means it's relevant to the public to know, there is nothing holding it back. There's nothing against it. Like, oh, you'd be hurting the UFC or something. That's not a relevant concern. That's not, you're speculating about that. You don't know that. And second of all, it's irrelevant. Like, is it news or not? That's it. Ray says, hey, Luke, would you consider moving to Colombia if the situation in the U.S. were to go south? I mean, it would have to be pretty bad, but I guess so. But I'm guessing if it gets this bad here, it's going to spill out everywhere else too, Dave says, question, have I ever tried infused weed? Also, no. Who made your AI judging thumbnail look to have AI art in it? On purpose, it does. Oh, I have an update about that. Happy New Year and appreciate the content as always. Update on that. I completely forgot to tell you. If you look at the video I put out with Corey Langner, and I said, oh, there's going to be the full interview tomorrow, and then it never debuted. There's a reason for that. So in the interest of disclosure here, before I published it, the full conversation, Jabbr is the company, they hit me up. And I had a conversation with them, and I cannot tell you what they told me, but the basic gist of it is that there was accidentally, because he didn't know what information he could tell me and couldn't tell me, there was a series of revelations that were made, many of which that are not ready for public disclosure because some of the deals are actually not even done. And they could jeopardize those deals. And, this could be, and the way it was in the interview in such a way where it was like, it wasn't just at the end, I could just trim that part off and then show you the rest. It was like kind of interspersed where it was like, I looked at it and I was like, I can't just trim out all these parts. It becomes like this junk pile of nothing. So I told him, I'm like, I cannot shelve this unless you give me something on the other end. So I did decide to shelve that interview. However, the CEO of Jabbr, a guy by the name of Alan, is going to sit down with me next week. And I'm going to ask, obviously everything that I can to get as much information as I can. But having some respect for the nature of, what they're able to say because what deals are done and not done. So heads up on that. That's why that interview never got released, or the second part of it anyway. Azad says, have you seen the videos of Abdul Manap cornering Shavkat and Khabib training him? Yes. Islam has all-time great potential, but he may wait out the 170 move. Possible, but I don't think it's enough for him to not fight him. I think he would still fight him. But yeah, the guy was ahead of his time. He was ahead of his time. Guillermo says, Luquito, what's the likelihood of AI judging retroactively exonerating Adelaide Bird's Canelo Triple G scorecard? Almost zero. Almost zero. That's an indefensible fucking scorecard. George says, Luke, if a president asked you to oversee a federal agency, is there one you'd prefer and why? Maybe the FCC, so we can help get what I would hope would be a reasonable degree of, I know net neutrality was knocked down by a federal judge last night, I believe, or yesterday. But, you know, people being in office to help advocate for things like that, I think would be helpful. But, you know, I'm not qualified to do that, so don't worry. It's not going to happen. Ray says, Jabbr are basically admitting that they're a glorified tallying system. No, that's not what they are. There's absolutely no way their model is able to discern impact on its own. Okay, so I've got a million questions about Jabbr too, even after doing my interview with Corey Langner. And what I mean by that is they've got a very confident assertion of what their product can do. And my only response is I actually have to see that in the real world for us to know that. They've actually got 5 degrees of impact on their model that they have that measures it. And I even asked them about how I'm going to get all of this out because some of this stuff they have to be able to tell you. I even asked about retreating versus leading in terms of ring generalship. I asked about counterpunching guys like Arslan Lara. I asked about body shots and how that can be hidden and blah, blah, blah. Here's what you have to understand about their system. You know, whether or not the motion tracking and everything works as well as they said, again, we have to just simply see it play out in the real world. What they did was they took a bunch of fights, a bunch of rounds, and they used their system to come up with a stats tally. And then they took the judges and the judging that came from it, and they matched those scores against those stats totals or whatever the stats information was. And that came up with a formula for what kind of statistical performance yields what kind of scores in what kinds of context, right? Because it's not just what one person put up, it's what one person put up relative to the other one. And then they use that to simply spit out a score based on whatever statistical information is gleaned from any individual future round, right? So that's how they came up with some kind of system by matching those, and they use that to spit out a score when they get this information. That's how the system essentially, in a broader way, as I understand it anyway, works. My question about that would be, how does that break out by weight class? How does that break out by judge? How does that break out by era? You know, what does that data set of what the judging and the stats performance look like? What is that bias towards? We don't really know the answer to it. And in fact, I had a bit of a back and forth with Corey in that interview about like the nature of it, because they claim that their scores are objective. And I'm like, it cannot be objective. There's no such thing. You know, you're taking human judgment to make some kind of a score based on a data set, but that data set we'll see it could bias in certain ways that are not necessarily clear to us yet, that could only be revealed over time, that we simply don't know about. And that's simply one, concern I have among many, which is how robust is the relationship between the judging and the stats that they use to create that system that can then assess what a score should be in other statistical performances. There's just a lot we don't know. So it's not a tally system. That's not right at all. However, they're very confident about a product that does seem interesting, but seems to me requires significantly more testing. Tanvir says, Luke, any opinions on Strickland's latest anti-Islam rant? I did not see this. How should his Muslim teammates at Extreme Couture feel about react to him? I'm only guessing he said something really horrible. I don't know. I don't know how anybody... The guy... he seems a little lost. I don't know what to say. The guy grew up with like the worst environment ever, and you can see what happens when that is a thing that happens to you. I'm not Islamic, I'm not Christian, I'm not Jewish, I'm not any of these things. So like I don't have any particular strong affinity for any of them over the other, or any at all necessarily, except to say I can only imagine what the fuck he said. I don't know how his teammates deal with it. That's a great question for them. I don't know. I people ask me for like opinions on like crazy things that people say, and it's like there's no take there. Like, there's nothing to say. I don't know exactly what he said. I don't even want to fucking know, to be honest with you. Like, I really don't even want to know. But a lot of times people say like really crazy shit, about any topic, and then they'll be like, "What's your reaction?" I'm like, I don't have one. There isn't one. There's nothing to say when people say manifestly absurd things, except that it's manifestly absurd. Like, if if it's, I don't know, pick something. If it's crazy anti-Semitic, if it's crazy Islamophobic, if it's crazy, I don't know, even anti-Christian, anything. And it's like wildly irrational. Like it's sort of obvious on its face. It's these things. I just tend not to have opinions about it. I think I have more opinions about, what people in their orbit want to do about it. I think that's a better question, and I can't answer that for them. Only they can answer it. I also tend to think it seems like he at times will say things and then, less so walk it back, but consequences fall in his lap, and then he's like, what am I going to do about it now? And I'll say this. God, now I have to look it up, but I'll be very curious to see what any of his teammates do about it. Right? We'll have to see. Oh wait, I think Othello sent me this. Apparently what he said was, America is a country of Christ. You could be a Christian, Catholic, atheist, but our core values is that of Christ. That's not true. I have nothing against Islam or Muslims, but Islam should stay in Islamic countries, although you would benefit from Christ. I'm agnostic. Yeah, I mean, that's... Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that. That is just deeply out to lunch. Damn. I don't even know. I don't even fucking God. It's like the layers of difficulty in trying to parse that is, yeah. Noticed watching Alex and Izzy in MMA, Alex has improved as a kickboxer, and unlike Izzy, who seems to regress the more they adapted the sport. Thoughts? A lot of guys regress with their natural skill set when they move to MMA. Ryan Hall told me his jiu-jitsu has gotten matter-of-factly worse because of MMA. That's not uncommon, even if that's true. Smile Bomb. Luke, I know you're a Hagler guy and BC a Leonard guy. May you two please record yourselves watching Hagler versus Leonard. I'd love to hear y'all's play-by-play reactions. Abrazos para ti y tu familia. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's actually a good idea. I love that. I'd love to see how Jabbr scores that one too, actually. NR, is the open hand slap to the ear underutilized in MMA? Is it possibly a debilitating strike when landed with a suction on the ear canal? Not from standing, but side control or mount positions. Maybe. But like when your choice is you could do like an elbow over the top, I don't see how that is better. Plus, like you have to get just the right rotation for that to happen in the right distance. That's a little harder to do. I don't know. Would you ever do an interview with Eric Paulson? I'm a major fan of his tutorials and think it'd be a fun interview. Perhaps collab with MMA on Point. I would do it in person. Yeah, I'd do it in person. Carl, the Italian Super Cup in soccer is currently being played in Saudi, and there is just zero atmosphere, same as boxing events. Do you think there will be backlash eventually? It'll take a while because there's a lot of money involved, but it'll take a while. Luke, if you're looking for video game recommendations and want to see inside BC's mind, check out 2020 seminal hit Leisure Suit Larry. That's an interesting one. I bet a grappler says, Pico versus Ilya would be very competitive. I saw him beat guys in the Oak State room at 14, and Roach said multiple times he would be a boxing world champ. Roach says lots of things. But yes, I think it'd be a fun fight, but I don't think the notion, I think Ilya would smoke him. Zenpai says, do you think out of the ring octagon antics should have an impact on GOAT status? For example, Ali versus Ali and Mike Tyson, albeit not having perfect records, are still considered GOATs by many. Not many people inside boxing really consider Tyson a GOAT. I got to be very clear about that. You talk to people inside boxing, he doesn't come up. He comes up as an important figure for era and a very celebrated figure, but not on GOAT lists. Most people inside boxing don't do that. That's not true. But the answer is you can do either one. If you want to have one that's in the ring plus more, or one that's just in the ring, that's fine. But you have to be clear about that criteria, and you're going to get different answers as a result. Right? Lapo said, hey, Luke, 22-year-old kid from Italy. Okay, we did this one already. Oh, suggestions about clubbing and nightlife. Buddy, I'm 45. I haven't been clubbing in New York City in fucking 15 years. I don't know anything about clubbing in New York. Marcus, are you going to watch Valencia Real? I will do my best. Look at this guy, Zenpai, gifting 10 memberships. You're a fucking mensch, my friend. Thank you. Jedi, Prime Cheetah versus Poetan would be awesome. Whose feints would win? Poetan hits a lot harder, though. That'd be kind of fun. This gentleman says, Luke, what's your BJJ journey been like? We've been over this a million fucking times. I can't keep doing this. Marshall, do you think Paul Hughes has any chance against Usman? Yes. Also, where would you rank Usman amongst Khabib prodigies? I don't know about the latter part. I tend to think Usman should win. I think he's slightly more polished and more experienced, but I think Paul Hughes has the capability of causing problems and winning a round or two. Usman against amongst Khabib prodigies. It's still a little too early to tell. David says, arranged marriages should be embraced in the West so that every dude gets laid. That's a little strong. But some people like them. Some people like them. Alan says, with consideration with 2024 205 conversation, how do we rank Poetan historically? He's a 2-division champ, but he was matched favorably. That's a very difficult question to answer, and I don't know. Because you're right, dude. He is a good fighter, and he did amazing things. And by the way, who knows? If he goes to heavyweight, like, who the fuck knows what happens, right? I don't think he'll win up there, but, like, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Let's see what his resume looks like when it's all said and done, and then we can, I think, more accurately compare it. Because I think you're right, man. Like, he's not a champion in an era where Daniel Cormier is active. He's just not. Look at this dude. I mean, just handing out memberships like a fucking mensch. And again, Zenpai. He's handing out 40 memberships. Go get them, folks. Go get them. Ronan says, hey, Luke, thank you for the great content. Do you recommend any books for young men trying to be better and speak better? Literally anything. People think that there's one kind of book you can read. It's like a self-help book for like articulation or reading comprehension or recall. And there might be individual books you can find. I wouldn't know what they are. I just tend to think a daily habit around books that you might enjoy, but also at times challenge you, and taking the time to parse the language and then understand it. This is what will get you to whatever level you're at and above it. Prashi says, I am on an H1B visa making $400K a year. That's a good living if you can get it. So we don't get paid less than Americans. Some do. There is some of that. It is a pain to hire H1 like $20K, $30K in legal costs. Abuse does happen with consulting companies, not by U.S. companies. Yeah, some of the tech ones that are involved. Although there is some U.S. companies, but they have international profiles, so it's a little hard to call them what they are. But there is clear data that the wage depression, it doesn't happen universally, but it happens enough that it's a problem. Here we go. JP says, Luke, they say comparison is the thief of joy, but self-awareness seems important as well. Curious about how you see the balance of staying in one's own lane in life versus being competitive. I don't think about it much other than, do you have a goal and what you're trying to get to achieve it? What makes you happy? What do you want to do? And then what is the roadmap to get there? And really, you just have to answer that for yourself. What is it you want to do? What does that look like? Only you know the answer to that. And everything else can follow backwards from there. Salutations, Certified Lord Sir Laird. Do you think there is an intrinsic link between the suspension of disbelief and immaculate conception? Do I think there is an intrinsic link between the suspension of disbelief and I don't know how you can get one without the other. Adamesh says, H1B visa holder here. Okay, I did my master's from a renowned university in the States and have a great job that pays really well. Good, awesome, buddy. Feels weird when I hear, especially from leftists who paint us all as slaves or indentured servants. I want to be clear. The program, I think, is largely successful. And by the way, it sounds like you're a great guy, and I'm glad you're here. Please don't misunderstand me. It's not that I'm trying to be as clear as I possibly can. I believe that there was, God, where did I fucking see this? Hold on. I'm going to pull this up. Hold on. We are going to find this. Where did I put this? Where did I put this? Where did I put this? I'll have to save it for next time. There was an economist who has been studying the impacts of H1B visas, who's not against them. I want to be clear. He's not against them, but understands the totality of what the information says in terms of what it does for wage suppression, again, overall, and then to what extent it locks out otherwise deserving Americans. I think that there is a bit of a misunderstanding about H1B because people think that, like, oh, this is a program that doesn't service American needs or American strength or American industry or the American social fabric. And I think all of that is very, very wrong. But it's also foolish to believe that some of the companies, especially the ones that are, again, doing, as he indicated, some of the overseas ones that are doing, or have a international profile, but a U.S. based state of business where they're like sponsoring tens of thousands of these, and then, and again, there is some broader data to consider about wage suppression that happens, that they're not monopolists and or tech oligarchs and or just otherwise, we're just going to trust all of the motives about all of the folks who are engaged in the H1B visa process as like above reproach. Like there are, it is in general, I think, a very successful program. And there are, I cannot be, it would be a disaster to get rid of it. A disaster. That is not my point. But I think it's also unfair to suggest there has been no abuse of this system by some of the tech interests involved over the life of this visa status. Alan W. BC plays Fortnite. Play Fortnite. It's free. I don't know shit about Fortnite. Terrence says, with Inauguration Day being on MLK Day, will it be over or under 50% MLK will be misquoted? Oh, God. I'll take the over. Can we get a rundown on your current camera setup? This is the Sony A7S III, and I forget the lens. I'll get that for you next week. It's a cheap lens, actually. It's not a Sony lens, but it works well with Sony mirrorless cameras. Video game recommendation, One Finger Death Punch. That is a band. Or no, it's Five Finger Death Punch. Is that real? Is that a real thing? Chris says, what do you think is next for the four horsemen of the action apocalypse? Dustin, Justin, Charles, and Chandler. I don't think any of them have much time left. A few more big fights, and that's it. H1B lottery, H1B1 lottery is like 1K, 100K, 120K a year, all highly specialized foreigners. That's also nothing compared to the possible 3 million plus illegals each year. I don't have any comment about the latter part, but again, I'm gonna collect this research that I saw from a guy who's been studying this for a long time, and I'll share some of the results next time that I'm up here. Brendan, I came home Wednesday night to the FBI closing off my neighborhood. Holy fuck. Since the Cybertruck bomber lived across the street. No way, dude. Was wondering if a national story has ever hit super close to home in any ways. Well, dude, I was here on Jan 6, 2021. I mean, I was fucking here. I had friends who live over near the Eastern Market area that had to fucking flee because people were setting off shit in their neighborhood. I mean, that's a real thing. But not like that. Not like a bomber across the street type shit. I've never heard of that. Dude, that. I don't understand that situation at all. The guy was apparently Green Beret, a big Trump supporter, but he wore like a Ukraine shirt. And I guess it appeared he offed himself, I think, in the vehicle. And then it exploded or whatever the fuck happened. And I don't understand. I mean, the symbolism, you can kind of see whatever, like for someone who would have like an aggrieved worldview, but like, and he came from Fort Bragg, and then the New Orleans scumbag came from Fort Bragg. Like, I don't know. I don't know what to make any of that. I'm just waiting for more information. I don't have a comment on it because I don't know what the fuck to make of it, but it is disconcerting, to put it mildly. Johnston says, Oliveira Islam prediction. First 2 rounds of mostly just trading strikes until Oliveira gets a TKO finish via armbar late in the 4th. So looking forward to this fight. I think Islam's ground game will be exposed. Buddy, I love you, Johnston, but that's not how that's going to go. Maddie says, what do you think about requiring fighters to have brain MRIs with every contract renewal to monitor CTE changes before it gets too late? I think in theory that's nice, but I don't know how realistic that is. for every fighter all the time. That would be a pretty big increase to medical expenses on the insurance policy. I don't think they want to do that. Thoughts on TYT starting the right-wing grift? Let me ask a question. I see tons of discussion about like Jank, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and Anna Kasparian and all this shit. And I'm like, why do we care? Why do we care what, I mean, okay, you or I might care about any one individual thing that one political commentator does, but like the vast amount of discussion that happens in left-wing spaces around the Young Turks and their turn to what seemingly seems like the right wing, why do we care? I don't understand why it seems so important to parse it, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I find there's like constant like YouTube reaction videos to it and people tweeting about it constantly. And I'm like, why is what they do, why do I have to spend my attention dollars on that? I don't understand that. I guess I don't understand that. That's the part to me I don't get. I don't know how to answer that. Super steroids. Thoughts on light heavyweights moving up to heavyweight like Spann, Petrino, Kennedy? Do you think they'll dominate the overweight heavyweights? I think in general it will work out well, but not for all of them. In other words, like 3 of every 5 will have some success. Science says, I read an academic study showing that reading fiction makes one more empathetic. Why don't you read fiction, and what is your favorite fiction book? Sound and the Fury is probably my favorite one. Again, I've kind of been over this a million times, but the long and the short answer is I just have so many needs and questions about the world that can only be answered by seemingly nonfiction books. I know that's not quite right, but it just feels that way. And so I just pick one down and I pick up the next one, you know. This dog. Along with the AI, have you heard of the MMA Judge Analyzer tool that records data from a judge during the round? And could this be used to train AI? I don't know anything about this. I appreciate the donation, but I don't have any information to reflect upon. 9:15. Hey, Luke, it's true that someone's control over you can be measured by the response they elicit from you. Should people care less about the political opinions of fight? I certainly don't give a fuck anymore. I mean, it depends. Like, if they've really got an informed take, even one I disagree with, but they've thought it through and then you know, they're consistent about it and they've got other things that kind of tell me that they're thoughtful, that to me is a little bit different. But just because like you're loud and you have an audience, I don't give a fuck about that, you know. Tom Genie, what are the best fights that could be made in 2024? We made them, buddy. We made them. And Evans, over under on political. Oh, dude, I said this before, man. I just, dude, we're in fucking not even inauguration day, and we're already with just madness everywhere. And there was a guy who was an Iraq War veteran who now is I think he's not a political like pundit, but like a journalist. And he put together this article. I think this was in The Intercept. I forget where I saw it. And he argues that like I think now the data shows that the number one predictor of political violence in the United States, not just recently, but this is now I think going back 15, 20 years, basically since the war on terror, would be to what extent they have a relationship to previously serving in the armed forces, which is a scary proposition. Very scary proposition. A lot is the answer. I'm worried about violence over the next 4 years. And in any direction, it's going to get, I think, bad, and that's bad for everybody. This is why when people ask me about Luigi Mangione, it's like, yo, but he stuck it to the healthcare guy. Guys, murder is bad. Murder is bad. Societies that have these things crop up are not functioning well, right? Even if some individual dies that you don't care about or you think maybe deserved it, you want to live in a world where justice happens on the terms of the justice system. Now, the justice system has to work, and if it doesn't, you get that. But you understand what I'm saying. You don't want to live. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want to live in a society that cannot account for its problems. That you don't want to live in a society where political violence lives because various forms of justice are never accounted for. That is a bad place. That is a bad place. Even if you think somebody you don't care about died. Murder is fucking bad. Michael says, Luke, stop letting my mental health get in the way and finally booked my passport appointment. Any recommendations on places to visit? If you've never gone anywhere and it's your first time, that's an interesting question. My recommendation would be the following. I would say don't take a super, unless you've got something in your mind and you just want to go see that, that's one thing. If it's your first time really leaving the country, go to a place where the dollar can go far and go to a place that's not too far from the United States and at least is somewhat tourist ready. Meaning like they've got some kind of industry there that caters to it. Now, I'm not talking all-inclusives. Fuck that. Forget all-inclusives. If you want to go see a place, you're not going to see it on a resort. I mean, a resort's a nice place to like unwind, but like why the fuck would you go there if you want to like go see the world, right? That doesn't make any sense. So to me, and obviously I'm biased, but I think Latin America from Mexico on down, the dollar's going to go far. Not every place is going to be safe, but you can find obviously safe ones and places that cater to Americans and other, international travelers. You can learn a lot about some really brilliant and beautiful societies and cultures. And it's not too far from the United States if that's a place where you're calling home. If you live in Europe, then, the world is your fucking oyster at that point. You can travel basically anywhere. Johnston says, who's my favorite fighter of 2024? Let's see. So many good options, but I'm picking LT. Through it all, he stood tall. May 2025 bring you and yours health, happiness, and success. I wish all the same to you, and I think we're going to be in a better place this year. I really do believe that. Ant says, I came to the U.S. on the L1 visa, meaning I can do things no American can. Like make a woman come. I've done all right. That's a funny bit, though. Nuclear says, recently graduated from AF Basic, Air Force Basic, and heard stories about how it was back in the day. Wanted to ask how harsh was your basic training experience? They said the same thing when I was in boot camp. So I went to boot camp in June of 1998. And they said the same thing. Oh, back in the day, we used to fucking, kill each other and eat each other's organs and shit. And I'd be like, well, we live in a more civilized era. But I didn't suffer too many abuses, If UFC had never created 125 and DJ stayed at 135 and bulked up, how does his career go? I think he's very, very good, but I was there. DJ fought Cruz in DC. That was at the Capitol, the time of the Verizon Center. The size difference was too much for him. It was too much for him. I think it would have impacted his career negatively in terms of limit what he can do, but he obviously still would have been good no matter what. Saul, MK all day. Love you, Saul. Thank you, my friend. And last but not least, Alan W. Perfect time to go to Japan. Your dollar will go far. Now, Japan, you can go far. You got to be careful about, I don't know if you need a visa to get to Japan if you're an American. I don't know how that works. And there might be a language barrier, but that's an amazing place to go. I went as a child. I've not been as an adult. I'm dying to go. I've heard great things about Taiwan as well. I don't know how tourist-friendly Taiwan is, but I've heard great things about it. But I always try to give people some baby steps. Like if you've never traveled internationally, it can seem kind of daunting. Like, how am I going to talk at immigration? You'll be all right. You'll get through it. But, giving someone a little bit of ability to get ahead. Also, the English language and the Spanish language, they have some overlap, so there's a little bit of an ability to use that. Whereas if you go to Japan, I don't know how that's going to go. But okay, let me say this, boys and girls. Happy New Year. Happy fucking New Year. Thank you all for being here. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Stay tuned. Got some stuff in the works finally. I know I've said that a few times and it hasn't really developed, but I've got a roadmap now. I didn't know what was happening to me last year, but now I do. And now I understand where I'm at and what the road ahead looks like. And it took me a long time to figure it out, but I've got it now. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you. I'll be back next week. I don't know if I'll be in studio for MK on Monday because of the snow. We'll see, but I'll have some content for you guys real soon. I'm going to get that Jabbr interview done with the CEO, and we'll be in good shape. All right? I love you all so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being supportive. We're out of here. Until next time, stay frosty, friends. Bye.